afternoon, folks, and welcome to AtlanTec Festival 2021. We're back again for our 7th year, and I've been running a packed event over the last 5 days. So I'm delighted that you've been able to attend a lot of sessions over the week. You can follow us on Twitter at AtlanTec Fest. My name is Peter McVeigh from Fidelity Investments, and I'm delighted to have you here as moderator and co-speaker today. Slide, William, please. But also major thanks to all our sponsors over the whole week, which without this, we wouldn't have a free event. Slide, please. Dr. Noel Carroll is an Associate Head of Learning, Teaching and Assessment at the School of Business and Economics in UIG. He's also the Program Director for the MSc in Information Systems Management and a lecturer in Business Information Systems. He's also a researcher in LERO, the Irish Software Research Centre. His research interests include seeking ways to support organizations in developing transformation strategies. George Bernard Shaw once said, "Progress is impossible without change, and those who cannot change their minds cannot change anything." And with that, I hand you over to Noel.
Thank you, Peter. I'll just share my slides here. So hopefully you can see them. Okay, so thank you very much for the invitation here to present some of our research. As Pete introduced me, I'm a researcher and also a lecturer at the UI Galway. I've been, I suppose, working in the area of digital transformation now for some time, and it's been great over the last week to see all the really interesting talks at the AtlanTec Festival and the range of discussions that have been going on for the last week. So that was really interesting to see, I suppose, the variety of insights around digital transformation. One of the aspects that I suppose I've been working in the area of digital transformation was largely around looking at, I suppose, the strategic level of how organizations look upon digital transformation and how they begin to strategize around adopting new technologies. But I suppose from experience with industry and experience across research, I've noticed that there's been a lot of emphasis really on the digital aspects and probably less insights on the transformation and the transformation process itself. So, I suppose I began to really inquire about what is that transformation process? What exactly are you trying to transform? So, for example, there's organizations that will describe digital transformation, but yet when you're trying to get an insight on the actual transformation, are they trying to transform internal operations? Are they trying to transform, say, markets? Or are they trying to transform your customer expectations and experiences? So I began to look a little, I suppose, deeper around how you begin to operationalize that digital transformation process, particularly around the transformation itself. And in more recent times, I suppose, to become more interested in citizen development and how that can offer new insights around how you begin to operationalize that sense of the transformation process itself. So over the next, I suppose, 40 minutes or so, I'm hoping to shed some insight on citizen development. And with that, I'll just give a quick insight in terms of the agenda. So I'll give you a little bit of background in terms of digital transformation and I suppose some of the key insights that many of you are already familiar with, but I just think it's important to include to give you a little bit of background. I'll then describe, I suppose, the importance of low code, no code, and how that has led to recent advancements around the area of citizen development. I'll do a quick deep dive on that in terms of, I suppose, what that entails, the opportunities that presents, and also I'll then hand it over to Pete, who will give an insight on Fidelity Investments and their experience around this, particularly with low code, no code. We'll try to summarize in terms of key recommendations. And of course, as a researcher, I'm always open to research collaborations, particularly in terms of research developments in UI Galway. And hopefully we'll have some time at the end to have some, I suppose, some really interesting questions around this topic. So I suppose it's important to highlight that, within the modern, I suppose, business environment, we are now living in this hyper agile world. And I suppose that puts us under a lot of pressure as businesses to try and not only respond to the growing changes in markets in terms of digital innovation and digital transformation, But now we must also look at trying to, I suppose, predict and anticipate what the future world of digital transformation is going to look like. So then that you put kind of a lot of pressure on us to look at how do we kind of future-proof that notion of a digital transformation. Because we say, more recent years, there's been a lot of emphasis on cloud and mobile and AI and so on. So like technology is evolving so fast, it's quite difficult to try and strategize around digital transformation process. We also know that businesses have begun to accelerate in terms of growth, and the need for transformation is becoming more and more apparent. So we know that I suppose digital transformation has become a core priority now for CEOs. It's one of these things that keep CEOs, I suppose, awake in terms of how do we not only respond to competition, but how do we try to, I suppose, compete and look at new technology innovations to outcompete other players in the market. So it's become a core priority. But if you actually look at the evidence around digital transformations, I'm sure you've saw this stat over the past week. It's estimated that about 70% of digital transformations actually fail. So the first time I saw this, I think it was in a McKinsey report, I began to question, okay, like surely this is something got to do with the digital aspects or a lack of understanding of technology alignment, within a business context. But when you dig a little deeper, you actually uncover that there's little evidence or insights on the actual transformation process itself. Again, a lot of discussions over the last week or so have focused on I suppose, like a lot of digital aspects. So we've heard a lot about cloud. Like this week, we've heard evidence around AI, agile, even blockchain, for example. But in terms of the actual transformation process, this is something that's almost like the Pandora's box or the black box itself, where we have little insight into how we can empower our teams to drive that change, to become, I suppose, owners of the transformation process at all levels in the organization. And I think what stood out for me also is of the successful digital transformations, it's estimated also that about 45% of them make profit. So in essence, about 15% of digital transformations are successful and make profit. Now, if you take a step back, for any aspects of change or digital transformation, surely that raises a red flag to say, okay, what's actually happening here? What's going wrong in terms of the overall transformation process? At the same time, we also know that there's a need for accelerated change and that need for governance. So we need to respond to that your sense of competition. We need to ensure that we have digital capabilities to compete, but at the same time, we need to ensure that we're not putting the business at risk, that we adhere to regulation and compliance, and it's effectively managed and protected. So I suppose on one hand, we need to move at a very fast pace under huge pressures, and then on the other hand, we need to do this in a slow, controlled manner to make sure that we tick all the boxes in terms of the compliance with regulation, and we do this in a very, effective way. So there's almost a paradox between the desire to move at huge speed and respond to markets, and at the same time, do it in a safe and controlled manner. So for me, I try to define this really in a way that it raises, I suppose, a problem-need kind of scenario. So on one hand, we know that there's a huge need now for digital transformation to drive the growth of business, but we also know that there's like an issue in terms of global shortages of skilled software developers. Over the last week, I've heard some really interesting discussions around the issue with the talent pipeline, across a number of organizations. So we heard earlier in the week that there's a real desire to drive new initiatives and new digital transformation ideas, but there's a lack of talent coming through the pipeline. At the same time, we also know that IT departments are commonly understaffed, and their backlog is growing and growing and growing the more emphasis that's placed on digital. So now there's a kind of growing demand, there's growing expectations on digital transformation that will, in essence, put more pressure on IT departments. But at the same time, they have insufficient access to resources, and there's a lot of issues around the lack of resources in terms of human resources, in terms of revenue, in terms of infrastructure. So there's a real kind of supply and demand issue going on. At the same time, we know from evidence that across organizations, they're trying to look for, let's call it kind of shortcuts, in terms of shadow IT, to try and look for alternative solutions to meet this demand. So that raises, I suppose, a number of issues around security, safety, scalability, leakage, and things going rogue. So it raises a lot of concerns around the opportunities to transform in a controlled, I suppose, manner, but at the same time to move at pace. So over the last decade or so, I'm sure many of you are familiar with this, but low code, no code has opened up, I suppose, avenues for new opportunities. For those that are not familiar with it, just kind of a quick snapshot here. So a no code platform are visual kind of software development environments that allows end users to drag and drop components and create kind of mobile apps, web apps, and so on. A low-code platform is for more of the technically minded. So, for example, they'd have experience in some of the IT aspects of the business. They have business ideas, and they kind of sit between, I suppose, business and IT. And it might require, I suppose, a little bit of coding, but it allows them to become, I suppose, more involved in developing solutions, developing, I suppose, digital applications, if you like. Two examples that we've worked with, I suppose, more recently would be, I suppose, Appian as part of a low code, and Betty Blocks as part of a no code application, for example. And these have proven to, I suppose, be really effective as part of a digital transformation process or as part of that journey. I'll give you some examples of that in a moment. So in more recent times, I've come across this area of citizen development. And I suppose if I was to try and illustrate this, I've used this container ship that many of you are familiar with. I see the container ship almost as the digital transformation journey itself. Within that is the CEO, the captain of the ship, that 99.9 times out of 100, they will make it from destination A to B. But sometimes along the way, they get lost or things happen along the way, and they kind of lose sight of what's happening on the ground. And I think this is what's happening in terms of the digital transformation process, where we get so distracted and so involved at a strategic level that we actually forget what's happening in terms of the operational side of things. So I see the citizen developer almost, as if it's this guy in the digger that's trying to chip in to try and provide a solution at an individual level that will have huge consequences in terms of the overall transformation process, the overall, I suppose, transformation journey. What's kind of nice about this illustration is that it kind of shows that at an individual level, at this kind of citizen development level, it illustrates how we can contribute towards the overall digital transformation strategy, the overall kind of digital transformation journey itself. So in essence, the citizen developers allow and they help companies to broaden the number of employees who can develop, who can innovate and deliver value. And that's key, that every employee has a sense that they can deliver value for the customers, for the overall business. What we're beginning to see on the ground is that a lot of digital transformations are failing because they feel, or staff might feel, that they can't contribute towards it. So they feel that they're aware of the digital transformation strategy, they're aware of a launch of a new initiative, but they can't see exactly where they can chip in or where they can contribute towards that. With this, I suppose, citizen development approach, it allows us to adopt a process that encourages non-IT trained employees to become software developers, not replace them, but just to have the technical know-how to allow them to overcome some obstacles from a technological perspective and adopt a low-code, no-code platform approach to create new business applications. The interesting thing about this is it hides the sophistication and the complexity around the coding. So in essence, it empowers people to take part of the digital transformation process. And you might say, what's that about? But is that such a big thing? What we're beginning to find in terms of research is if business users can't buy in to a digital transformation, they feel that they can't embed it or they can't sustain the transformation process, they tend to overlook the need or the urgency of the digital transformation. And as a result, they kind of dwindle in terms of the buy-in that they initially had. So at the start of any launch of a transformation strategy, there's huge enthusiasm, huge excitement, and then it begins to dwindle. Because in often cases, people fail to see how they can contribute and keep the lights on as part of that transformation process. So in essence, there's three, I suppose, distinct markets that we're beginning to see across the use of digital transformation. And it's been used in companies, I suppose, across the US and across the UK that we're beginning to analyse. And we see that there's faster, I suppose, traditional development. It's allowing us to facilitate IT to speed up that traditional software delivery. Again, it's much more inclusive. It's much more of an empowering model to, I suppose, allow business users who are at the front line to begin to innovate and develop new solutions around that. In terms of business innovation, it allows companies to enable the business teams to deliver effective, efficient, and safe, I suppose, solutions. Again, trying to address that IT gap that we often talk about. And in terms of shadow IT, it allows the CIOs to have more control over software. So again, it allows them to sanction, here's a certain toolbox that you can use, here are the multiple platforms that we can use, and it allows them to kind of choose from that toolbox in terms of what's acceptable in terms of the digital transformation process and so on. The opportunities that we're beginning to see is, and I'll try and summarize these, is that it's broadening the number of employees who can develop, innovate, and deliver value. And that's really important. That sense of inclusiveness, that kind of sense that as a business user or as an end user, like within the organization, I can contribute towards this digital transformation strategy. I can develop, I can innovate, and more importantly, I can deliver value at certain points across the digital transformation process. And again, I suppose our evidence would suggest that it brings the transformation aspects to life. It's not just something that's there as a strategy and that's kind of sitting there at a high level. It's actually bringing it to life. Something that end users can actually operationalize, they can actually contribute towards, and they can celebrate as part of that. It also kind of leverages recent advances in technologies. So a lot of these low-code, no-code platforms are pretty sophisticated, and it hides that complexity around the code functionality. So again, it doesn't have this kind of digital divide around the business and IT functions, but instead it allows you to bridge that IT gap between these kind of functionalities. I think the third point is probably even most important, is it empowers people to create and deliver on change. Now, if you kind of think about that for a moment, we kind of heard about the challenges about trying to embed, I suppose, the digital transformation process, how you manage it, how you staff it, and so on. So looking at solutions that allow us to empower, to create and deliver change, that's pretty powerful in terms of how you can sustain and deliver value in a digital transformation process. But more importantly, it allows people at the front line within the business context to identify all of these, I suppose, inefficient processes. And it looks at how they might be able to address them at a local level. Again, it allows us to look at how you can assess and control the governance framework and deliver anticipated value. And what we've seen, like across industry, particularly I think more so in the banking sector that we've seen more recently, is that it allows them to look at best practice. So we've seen where organizations would adopt citizen development as part of a digital transformation strategy. And it could be like very new to many companies. But over time and very quickly, best practice begins to rise to the top, and they begin to figure out how to look at a digital transformation almost as building blocks in terms of how you might achieve a transformation process and deliver on that. We often compare it to like Lego blocks, where at the very start you get a kind of a bag of Lego. It looks very complex. You're looking at something like kind of a Star Trek ship or something like that. It looks quite complex and convoluted. So then you have this instruction manual, and brick by brick or block by block, you begin to develop something that you couldn't anticipate at the very start. So it's the same kind of approach where we're beginning to see how companies are beginning to establish the best practice around that. It allows them also to architect, to build and deploy standardized digital and data tools that can be used to accelerate assurance outcomes. And that's quite important. It ties right back to how people feel that they can deliver value as part of a digital transformation process. So tying value with outcomes fuels the transformation process and ensures that it remains sustainable and it can be managed across a certain time frame. And the question for me was, well, is this hype or reality, or what is the kind of opportunities in this? It's estimated that, I suppose, kind of demand for I suppose, low-code and no-code developers as such, what we'll call citizen developers, will be 10 times the speed and 70% less resources required in organizations. It's also estimated that the uptake of citizen development will be about 50% adoption by app developers and businesses. Gartner predicts that there's going to be a flood of multi-platform adoption across organizations. It's also estimated that low-code, no-code platforms will take about 60% of the market share in terms of app development and so on. Microsoft, who are hugely invested in this right now with their Power Apps, they predict that the vast majority of apps will be low-code, no-code. So much so that they actually think that it'll be the next kind of Excel almost. It'll be so pervasive that everybody is going to be working on these type of platforms. Gartner also predicts that 65% of all apps in the next 5 years will be low-code, no-code. And it's always nice to put, I suppose, a financial value to see the worth of, like in terms of low-code, no-code. And it's estimated that it's worth about 21 billion, as a market. So that kind of gives you an insight in terms of the growing demand in this space. Interestingly, by next year, they reckon that developers will be outnumbered by 4 times. So these, I suppose, IT graduates, IT developers as such, the software developers, they may be outnumbered by 4 times over the next year or so. And we see organizations like Project Management Institute, where they've invested a lot of time, like a lot of resources on citizen development, and they've, in terms of the body of knowledge, they have developed new courses and handbooks and so on. So it's interesting to see the investments that they're putting in there, and some colleagues from there, even like Lee Moron, for example, is quite helpful at a local level on that. Just a very quick example. I was looking into, I suppose, Microsoft Power Apps. Many of you might be familiar with this. They claim that it reduces development costs and increases overall efficiencies. So I looked at a recent report, Forrester report on Microsoft, which was conducted last year, and they basically found that you're waiting for IT departments to deliver on solutions is not really viable anymore. So they looked at Power Apps. And just a quick summary of the findings. They discovered that there was a 188% return on investment over 3 years. They also discovered that there was a 74% reduction in app development costs. From an employee productivity perspective, they saw that there was a 3.2 hours per week average improvement in line of business. And in essence, they saw over 40% of the organizational leaders are having some sort of kind of citizen development initiative, and 20% of them were actually considering it going forward. So it's kind of interesting just to see the I suppose the growing trend, the growing opportunity in this space. And I think the best way to kind of discuss this even further is maybe to hand it over to Pete and their experience at Fidelity.
Yeah, thanks, Noel. So just before we start, in the chat, I've kind of put a few questions out there. So if people kind of want to maybe have a look and see, give some updates on maybe how they're using low-code platforms and so forth, it'd be just very helpful for us to know. So my view is kind of a background on kind of low-code at Fidelity, very high level, and then where our citizen development kind of where we are with that as well. And myself and Noel did our slides separately, so basically everything he said, it kind of falls on from our experience as well. So it kind of shows that what's there. So kind of one of the things we think about is business agility as a top priority across all the industries. And to help achieve that, it kind of falls back on what Noel was saying, is that IT and business need to align a lot closer around common agile practices. We all need to, app modernization. And how do we do that? We all know that there's a limited availability of IT skills. And then there's also that increased complexity due to the demand of our digital business transformations. And this is where low-code platforms and citizen development are starting to play a more prominent role around our business transformations. If you want to go on to the next slide there, please, Noel. So I've been an architect, we like to put a lot of information there. So this is a busy slide. So as Noel had said, Gartner predicts within the next couple of years, 65% of application code, actually if you go back, application code will be low code. And, most enterprise applications will have 4 or more of these low code platforms. Now, in our organization, we have way more than 4, and most large organizations do, because the low code would start a lot of the time with your workflow engines. So a lot of us are used to having workflow engines where they would have some sort of a GUI in it where, basically your software engineer or your IT product could actually come along and create their flows and push them through their different environments. So that is a use case that is still out there a lot. So kind of I go through some of the ones we have. So one of the ones that we have, an enterprise workflow engine. It was built on open source. So this is one that we use for a lot of our BUs within our enterprise. This is a full stack blown out one used by software development. This wouldn't be for any citizen developers. We also have a no-code app that's been built internally, and I'd imagine other large enterprises have a similar thing. So in this case, this is an in-house self-service digital forms creation capability. This can be used by software development, by the business, or IT product. And this, in the last year, has actually been a great benefit where with COVID, a lot new, these very quick self-service forms had to be created, and they've been pushed out to both internal and to external facing customers. So that is something that we have. And, I would imagine a lot of large companies have something similar like that. When you start looking also through history, you kind of looked at CRM systems. So all large enterprises have multiple CRM systems. Probably over the last few years, most of them have now gone to SaaS, and they've probably hopefully consolidated to probably one primary one. And all these major CRM systems, they also have a load code capability, and generally it's mainly around the UI and the whole lot. So they're capabilities that you're going to continue to use as well, and people build a lot on those. And the next one then is we have several SaaS load code platforms as well that we have started to look at, where initially the strategy was for line of business, but the second level strategy has been for citizen developer, and I'll talk in the next few slides around that. So the citizen developer is the next aspect that we do see within our organization. And then there's the final kind of ones that I see are a lot of these other SaaS providers are providing sort of other management platforms, a lot of them around infrastructure and the whole lot. And a lot of these themselves have low code capabilities where you can go in and build out your own UIs. But again, these ones are going to be used by either the engineering or IT product, and it's very specialized. But again, it's a different combination that we have. So when you look at large organizations, we have so many of these low code ones, and obviously everyone still has Excel all over the place, which is your ultimate one. And the funny thing about Excel is the language that's kind of written, I think it's called FX or something. I think that's now being morphed into a Power Platform now, the same capability. So it's kind of funny. Noel, do you want to maybe move on to the next slide? Yes. Okay, so here I'm kind of giving a high level kind of decision tree around how you might look at when you're looking, should we use a low code or not? And on the left, I have kind of other criteria that you might want to look at. So obviously each business unit are going to be different, but I mean, some of the things you're going to look at are, is it high performant? Do you expect that your recovery time objective is maybe less than, we'll say 8 hours? Well, some of these SaaS ones, if they go down, is that good enough or not for you? So you're going to look at those. If it isn't, that's fair enough. If it is, you kind of go down and look at the next number of criteria that we have there. Actually, I can't even see it now. It's a bit small, but so you basically kind of go through the different levels of criteria here that you can see, and then you bit by bit you're going to make out if really a low code is your option or not. Some of the other things that we take highly on is the whole thing around security, right, and data loss prevention. So I think that is one of your important things to look at, that if you do go and get a SaaS low-code provider, that is data loss prevention, especially if you're going to have citizen developers out there, because they could easily leave gaps in your security for you. That's one of the most critical one, that you do have those security controls. Also, what data is in and out of those systems, you need to think a lot about. The other thing that is kind of a high priority as well is, you don't want to be creating APIs yourself to any of these other systems. So have you got a lot of good connectors and other apps that you can easily configure and hook into? So they're all very important as well that you should consider. Okay, Noel, do you want to go to the next slide? So as I was kind of saying, within Fidelity, we have multiple low-code platforms, but they're mainly used by our IT and engineering and product teams. But we are working towards certain low-code platforms for citizen development with a strong governance. Part of this is that we do have a digital workplace office to provide support and best practice. There also is a COE to help out on that. But when you start out initially, and here's just an example, is that you may give access to certain capabilities. So in this example here, you may give all associates access to SharePoint and Teams and Exchange, and that would be based on their permissions that they would have in your organization anyway. So within that, they could create apps or flows connecting to whatever permissions they have, but they can't get to anything else. So it's important when you start out that that you do have network and access controls in place, that you also make sure that you have other restrictions, that they can't use premium connections, they can't access other cloud service providers. Now, if it's a line of business in the same one, you're going to have a different process where you're going to allow them the ability to use these services, but there's obviously you go through a full governance and security reviews before we allow any of that. And all of this is to make sure that we don't lose any data. Okay, do you want to shoot on to the next one, please? Yeah, so governance, as is often said, it's not a single step and it keeps changing all the time. So we do have a lot of governance around these low-code platforms. If we see the apps or the workflow isn't being used, you use it or lose it kind of policies. If we see oversharing with ones, we want to know why. There is continuous searches being done to see is there any non-approved patterns out there, and if they're found, they have to be reviewed, and that app or workflow could be taken away. So there's a lot of groups involved in all of this as well, like your cybersecurity teams, your risk teams, and information security officers. So a lot to think about in here when you actually want to put governance around this stuff. Noel, do you want to the next slide? So I guess some of the things, we've kind of mentioned a lot of the benefits that we have from low-code platforms. I guess some of the challenges overall that you're going to see is, I think Gardner I think it was 18 months ago in one of the reports I saw that they said there was 200 companies or so that are in this space. But if you talk to every company, they tell you they have some sort of low code capability in there. And there's probably way more now. So there's a lot of companies out there, a lot doing it. So you need to make sure that you really vet the ones you really want that make sense for you. Governance, security, and data loss prevention policies are important, right? So this is your biggest thing that you need to. They can be a challenge, right? A lot of these platforms, there's a lot of manual process at the minute for setting these up, and they can be very cumbersome. A lot of these platforms don't have DevOps. If they are, it's very poor. Some of these platforms, you have to think of, you can't run your most critical apps in there, but a lot of the apps that you want internally, they can be very excellent for them. So you need to work out where they are. And as I said, kind of manual processes, you need to review all those as well and try and get rid of them. Things you need to do is governance. You need to have a governance strategy in place. Obviously, operation strategy for isolation of content and data. Establish a user community. We have done that. Training is important, that you have online training. What we have, if you're a line of business, you're going through a COE who have expertise to help you go through all the process. If you're a citizen developer, that should be going through a digital workplace office. Okay, and I think that's me.
Okay, so just kind of hand it back. Thanks, Pete. That was great. I suppose some of the key recommendations that we saw, I suppose across research and across industry is, I suppose, first of all, when you're thinking about a digital transformation, the first and fundamental question is, what are you trying to achieve? And I think this cropped up as well earlier in the week, but what are you actually trying to transform? Is a certain parts internally in the organization? Is it externally in terms of the customer experience, or are you trying to drive, I suppose, a new segment in the market? So trying to actually understand that, I suppose, as part one of the journey is critical. And then once you figure that out, I guess it's a case of trying to understand what are the bottlenecks within the company, what's the growing, I suppose, dependency in IT as a result of trying to achieve this. So if you're trying to drive, a new market, what's actually happening, internally within the organization, what might prevent that in terms of the impediments that are going to prevent that transformation process. And what does this mean in terms of the overall IT department? Are you now going to put a growing dependency on IT as a result of that? I think once you understand that, then it's important to examine the workflows and look at how it can be a case of small changes. Again, it comes back to the analogy of the Lego blocks and these building blocks. When you actually figure out the parts that you have to play with, it can actually lead to more, I suppose, meaningful and large scale changes. It's not like a digital transformation is going to take place overnight, but you must look at these in smaller, I suppose, parts, look at the workflows, the building blocks, and how they can actually lead to more impactful digital transformations. Of course, if citizen development is going to play a role in that, it's important to look at the overall, I suppose, citizen development opportunities. And one example, I suppose, that I've been using in more recent times was the PMI Citizen Development Body of Knowledge. I just included a screenshot there for anybody that might be interested in it. And again, I'm happy to discuss this with anyone a little further. It's I suppose, important to look at the return on investment. If you were to reduce the bottlenecks that you identified, if you were to improve, I suppose, frontline operations, what does it actually mean in terms of return on investment? Does it drive any added value? And if not, I guess you got to wear the lean hat and say, well, if it's not driving value, surely there's some element of waste then. So that return on investment is important. But in more recent times, I'm beginning to see the importance of promoting the concept of return on experience for digital transformation. And return on experience, I think, is probably a more radical view of a digital transformation process. And that can be internally, like within the organization, in terms of the all the end users' experience in driving and sustaining that transformation process, or it can be externally in terms of the customer experience. So even though you've driven a new kind of digital transformation process, you delivered a new tool or a new solution, what does that mean in terms of the external customer experience? Does it make their life any different, or is it just that you've got the latest and greatest technology to showcase? So it's important to look at the return on investment, but also the next, I suppose, element of that, or the next layer to that, and probably more importantly in terms of how you sustain these, is the return on experience. Will it drive any value for the end user or the employee? If you're interested then in trying to look at incorporating citizen development, it's important to look at how you might deliver that in terms of new capabilities. What might a citizen development you bring to your organization to drive new, I suppose, unfound capabilities that you want to try and drive internally? And then look at how you can establish your citizen development control and governance framework. So again, it's important to look at these in terms of not allowing people to go rogue as such, but trying to have some sort of a framework to embrace the idea of the transformation process and to allow these I suppose, low-code, no-code platforms to enable that process. I suppose from an academic perspective, there's a lot of work going on, I suppose, particularly the BIS department, the UIG, in terms of digital transformation. So if people are interested in trying to engage with new initiatives at a regional level or national level or international level, we'd very much, I suppose, welcome the opportunity to do that and to speak to you on that. I suppose in summary, I've been speaking, I suppose, about building blocks quite a lot, and I suppose my son Oscar has a newfound love for Formula One, and as part of that, he's incorporated the love for, I suppose, Lego and Formula One, which is a nightmare. But I suppose when you see these things at the outset, like you're looking at, again, at a bundle of blocks, and you're scratching your head, going, "Wow, this is going to be a nightmare." But it's not until you actually look at trying to achieve this brick by brick or block by block and following some sort of guidance or some sort of instruction manual that it allows you to achieve the ultimate outcome, like the overall project and so on. So again, I'm beginning to see the need to look at digital transformations and citizen development almost as ways, as little building blocks to empower the end user, to empower the business user to contribute, to deliver value, and to drive and sustain that transformation process. He's not He's not a Ferrari fan, by the way. He's more of a Red Bull fan, so I just have to note that. And I suppose finally, just in terms of research collaboration, it's something that we're very much interested in. At Lero, I'd be very much interested, to hear from anybody here, in terms of citizen development and digital transformation, examining maybe the kind of different phases or maturity levels in adopting citizen development, or indeed like just to explore or evaluate the readiness of your organization to do so, how it might contribute towards sustainability and the overall benefits of citizen development in the transformation of practice. So you can reach me there on that email if you wish, noel.carroll@inuagalway.ie. And are we taking questions now, Peter, or?
Yeah, no, we definitely can take questions. So we could post that link in here, or we can get it sent out after. Yeah, just as you're finished up, maybe just give some more details on how someone might collaborate on research related to citizen development.
Yeah, so at the moment, I'm actively working in this space, like with a number of of international companies also. So if somebody wants to reach me by email at noel.carroll@inuagalway.ie, I'd very much appreciate the opportunity to speak with you or to discuss opportunities to I suppose get involved in some of the research that we're doing there.
Yeah. So there's another question here is, so within the universities, are you looking to migrate to low code, no code models from both an operational and teaching and learning?
Yeah,
it's kind of an interesting one
so I
to see.
think yeah, that's a great question. So, in terms of an operational level, there are some, I suppose, pockets of interest, in the adoption of low code, no code, and there has been some very good successes from that. In terms of teaching, I'm beginning to see that there's new capabilities required across industry in terms of project management, for example, where our graduates will describe, I suppose, projects in terms of innovation and success and so on. But I'm beginning to see that there's going to be new criteria also in terms of project management of how you can actually, I suppose, demonstrate not only the innovation, but also like your ability to create, I suppose, new digital artifacts. So I think low code, no code will play a growing role as part of curriculum and also in practice in terms of in terms of what we do. So yeah, it's definitely going to play a future role.
Yeah, okay. So I see there's a question here from Joe to me. Peter, how does Fidelity handle your compliance and risk control functions from a low code perspective? Things like data controls, etc. Thank you. All right, it's not an easy one. So I mean, we have multiple low code platforms, but kind of one of the ones I know, I mean, when we go to use a certain connector, for example, so we wanted to call from one of these SaaS ones into, say, our on-prem database or something like that, right? We would have a review process where we would meet with our ISO information security officers, we would meet with data architecture and compliance and kind of review what we're calling this database. This is the data we're getting back. So that is kind of a manual step that we would be doing first, but it is a process whereby, so before that connector would be approved and enabled in that environment for us to use, it would have to have gone through that process to know exactly the data that we're pulling in and what we're doing with it. And that connector, depending on the connector we're using as well, it would view to see is there potential that data could be available to other people within the org that we may not want to enable. So that is one thing. Behind the scenes, there is a COE group, and what they are running scans across the platform as well for different patterns and the whole lot. I'm not sure exactly the ones they run, but they do run ones there to see if there's any patterns that they think there's data coming through that shouldn't be coming through, and then you appear on a list and you have to sort it out. So hopefully that may answer that question. I guess another one here, do you see career opportunities for students around citizen development in industry?
Yeah, that's something that we're beginning to see, from speaking to, I suppose, industry, there's a greater need also to kind of showcase, I suppose, their ability to tackle problems, to address, critical thinking aspects of, of business processes. So there is a growing interest in this space, in terms of trying to showcase, I suppose, capabilities, in terms of digital transformation, digital, I suppose, solutions and so on. So again, something that like for example, I've got a group, like a master's group that have worked with a hospital. They figured out a particular problem that they had in terms of admissions. They went along, upskilled in low code, no code, and actually developed a solution around the admissions process itself, and addressed specific problem that had a clear cut need in a very kind of short time scale. So the ability to do that really demonstrates the power of, I suppose, these aspects of low code, no code citizen development in a digital transformation, I suppose, context. Normally that would take weeks, months, or in some cases years to try to deliver. And this was actually done, I suppose, in a couple of days, in terms of the turnaround time. So again, it showcases the power of these platforms, and it's something I think that we're going to put more emphasis on as part of our teaching and training.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, from our perspective, most of our low code is on the line of business. But one of the things, because we have these platforms, is one of our business units, they have basically the same internal customer, but they actually have multiple different applications that are legacy ones for years. And what they've done is they had a strategy to bring them all into this low code platform. They have built very sophisticated UIs, used the workflows, and then integrated with a lot of our, with Azure, Amazon, or internal databases, internal APIs. So they've actually built a full end-to-end platform, but instead of having 5 or 6 UIs, they're now all integrating into one. So their user before had all these different systems to go to that were never the same, and that's on a low code platform. So from a line of business, there's been some really good work done there. On the citizen development, we're still on that low journey. I mean, people have the capability of doing it, but we haven't really told everyone about it at the moment. We're kind of, our line of business is the priority. The next is it's there. If people know about it, they can go and use it. But we do see that people, do simple things where, they have a SharePoint website and they basically want to have a form to go and, you book some review session, and behind the scenes they can take all those documents, send them somewhere else, automatically have calendar invites sent out to someone. So it's simple, but someone can set up their own workflows and their own little UI, and it's nothing to do with anybody, right? So that's making someone's life easier than having to go and pull attachments, put them into an email, send them out, make sure they have the dates right. All this sort of, it's very simple things, but you're giving someone the ability to do that. That's a very simple use case
Yeah,
that we have.
yeah.
So very,
And I
very,
guess
very powerful.
that's important, and I suppose it touches on the next question that I see here about what the training side of this. Could you share some, I suppose, insights on training in terms of low code, no code?
Yeah, so I mean, within ours, we do have a number of kind of SaaS providers for online learning material. So there is one curriculum that's been set up for the low code for basically your main developers. There is someone looking at the moment for your citizen developers as well to offer that out. So we have some people that are uh, kind of being picked as kind of ambassadors for citizen developers, and they're kind of going through to find out all the issues that they're, and then bringing it back, and then they're going to be the ones that are going to be the ambassadors for everyone else out there. This all falls under kind of, we have a digital workplace office, and this kind of falls underneath that. So I think that's an important kind of thing in a large organization to have that in place. And obviously, we do have a user community for the line of business ones, where we get together and discuss, what we're building. For the citizen developer, that would be the next stage as that gets rolled out more.
Brilliant, yeah, yeah. I see, I suppose, a related question here, just in terms of the adoption of that. Do you think it changes your team structures, or is there a need to invest in new team structures as a result of this, or?
Um, well, from your line of business, it's just your normal team. As I don't really see much of a difference. From a citizen development, I guess really going through a digital workplace office is important. I think the governance in place has to be one of the first things you need as well as you look at this. Um,
Okay.
So let's see, is there any more questions out there? Maybe if we, I think that's all the questions that we have. Do you want to maybe the last slide? So just the final up here. Thanks again for the great support and sponsorship over the week, and hopefully we'll all meet again in person next year in Galway. AtlanTec always likes to have a kind of an art element if we can with the conference. So we're going to play out with a poem from the Cool Park poetry series, which is running at the moment. So this is by the Drew Theatre, and they're putting it up on YouTube. And what they're doing is every week they have a different actor who's going to read a poem. And this week it's a local guy, Tommy Tiernan, who we all know. So if we want to play off of that, and thanks again, everybody, and have a good weekend. And thanks for attending the festival all week.
Thank you, everyone.
I stood one day in the great pleasure garden at Coombe, where the catalpa blossomed, handing out pods in autumn, long as cigars that George Moore and Edward Martin smoked after dinner at Tullyra. Sad wilderness of panicans, roses gone thorny, 7 leaves instead of 5 gay sportive blooms that have lost their seed and names in lengthy Latin. I stared a while beneath the copper beech, where railings guarded initials, wintered in the bark, deep cut of W, B, and Y, AG, AJ, AE, and SOC. Thinking again how Lady Gregory would drive 12 miles day after day, sun raining in a phaeton, along her avenues with phaeton, through the 7 woods, by alleys of wild privet, lake lingering, to count the swans for Willie. I came to the bus, Mycilus, rumbling on his pedestal, obeyed the clear instructions in that unfinished poem of Yeats, calling to find the echo that lives by the high wall at the left-hand corner in private. Echo. Whereabouts can you hear from? Here. My task in the future, can I know? No. Must I still hope? Still body on. On. Yet how can I be certain my way is right? Right. Tell me what thoughts had Carroll O'Daly, swift, who called on other echoes, lonely as you. You.